Well, hello everyone. My name is Jan Alexa. I'm a research manager for IDC European Insights, and I'm focusing on education industry. So that will be a topic of this presentation as well as was the case with the previous one. But in this one, we will get a bit different angle on what's happening right now in the education industry across Europe. So in the previous one and the big stage, I mainly talked about long-term trends. But now I would like to guide you through what's happening right now. And to do that, we need to really address the big elephant in the room caused by microscopic elements. So let's move on and talk a bit about the magnitude and the sheer amount of challenges that 2020 has brought to education industry. And this is interlinked naturally with COVID crisis. So as you can see on the graph, the magnitude of this crisis worldwide was really unprecedented. At one point in April, we estimate that 1.1 billion learners were affected in some way by the COVID crisis. So this is really something that affected almost everyone. And as we are nearing the second wave of the COVID, in some countries, the lockdowns already are happening quite heavily. We will see this scenario, unfortunately, to be repeated. So that brought a lot of challenges to schools, and they needed to address these challenges in various ways, uh, be it in primary and secondary education sector or in tertiary sector where the situation was a bit different, but still the lockdowns are happening as well. So what were the main challenges and main issues that education industry needed to address? So we can summarize them by at one stage challenges and then the corresponding solutions challenge. So first of all, the big, obviously, big problem stems from closure of the schools, closure of universities, but then you have follow-up challenges. So uh, there was a need to a rapid rollout of new educational content, because let's face it, most of the learners and most of the educators were not really prepared to fully adjust to digital learning and remote learning just like that. It took time. Then there was also an additional strain coming from the need to engage daily, in some cases even hourly, especially in primary education, with additional stakeholders. So not only learners, but parents needed to be involved as well. Then there was also a need for continuous reskilling of the staff, because a lot of teachers, especially teachers in primary and secondary education, were not really skilled enough to immediately transfer to the full-scale remote learning experience. They have not done it before. They haven't had content prepared, and of course they haven't been fully prepared to the let's say difference in how to conduct successfully a remote learning lesson as opposed to the standard in-class lesson. So that has been quite challenging as well. And finally, two main last challenges were the impossibility of enrollment process being conducted on the spot, and this, of course, is both the challenges with the admission process and let's say the open days in universities, so that the students can really see and talk with the faculty before they apply, but also the testing, the admission testing, which is supposed to happen in most secondary and tertiary schools. Those have been moved online. In some cases, they have been postponed or abolished altogether. But this brought additional challenges, and these challenges were met in various degrees by schools and universities across world, across Europe, by the following manner. So obviously, a response to closure of schools is a move to remote distant learning. But then you also need to have a response to these additional challenges. So there was a huge rise in the usage of content management and agile development of new content. There was also a huge rise in app being used, collaborative apps being used across Europe. Now, the stakeholder communication and the rapid development of stakeholder ecosystem, remote stakeholder ecosystem within the educational ecosystem as a whole, was a second main development that happened during the months of the first COVID crisis. And then there was also a huge rise of learning platforms to upskill teachers, upskill not only learners, but teachers and lecturers to be able to meet all these challenges. And finally, we have also seen a lot of development in terms of virtual tours, online testing, and also, especially as governments try to react to the crisis, the rise of device and connectivity as a service. Because we have seen worldwide that a lot of learners, and in some cases teachers as well, they simply didn't have means to successfully transfer to remote learning. So these were the main challenges. And of course, as we saw in the Europe, often the difference between being successful and not successful run not country by country, but within a country. Some educational facilities were very successful in moving towards learning conducted by remote means, and some were not. And there was also a crisis in terms of the financing, as especially tertiary education is quite struggling with the financing right now in some cases. Now, if you look at the data and if you look how the situation looks right now, because these are quite current data, the crisis is still ongoing, both in financial terms, but also in terms of being able to develop full educational experience to the learners. And this is true both in Europe and worldwide. But in Europe, the situation is a bit more difficult than in some other geographies, especially in terms of lockdowns right now. So we can still see a lot of being done in terms of mitigating the problems that that education industry faced in the first stage of this crisis. So, what is the main lesson that we see happening from the current crisis? Now, everyone before the crisis talked about the importance of remote learning and how massive online open courses will displace the university education, but that is not what we see happening right now. Actually, I think that the main takeaway from the crisis is that while the remote learning is very important, and it's especially important in extraordinary times that we are now facing, uh, this is not something that can fully replace standard educational experience. We can hear that from learners, we can hear that from teachers, and we can hear that in case of smaller children from parents as well. So this is really a key topic that we need to address here. That while the education as a whole is pretty much able to partially transfer to remote model, the remote model is not here to fully replace the traditional model. At best, we will live in the future in times of blended learning, but not fully remote learning. That's quite sure. So, what are the uh, what are the, what are they doing in terms of being able to meet these challenges? What are the educational stakeholders actually doing about that? So the software development capabilities and the product innovation are at the top, and of course, we can also see quite heavily the existing collaboration application capabilities are often not enough. So we see a lot of investment in those. There are multiple other areas, such as the digital trust operations. So the next gen security is becoming really paramount, and also the business operation resilience program. That is also quite difficult to achieve. Now, uh, let me be clear. The so far the results of COVID crisis are very uneven, and we see basically two types of educational providers emerging. The first type, they've done really well during the first crisis. So their priorities are a bit different than the priorities of the second type of provider. Now, the first type of provider, they now fully mastered the business resiliency and business continuation and continuation of the learning process. So what they really focus on right now is how to utilize these new capabilities for further development. But there is a second type of provider, and this provider is especially, let's say, common in primary and secondary education. And that's the provider that really struggled. And right now, they are really struggling as well with continuation of learning process, because if you can imagine that you can stop the learning process for a few weeks in March or April, even for a month, just by doing some remote homework. But if there is a second wave, and this is now quite likely, it's paramount to really get the process going and fully going, not just few homeworks now and then, because learners, especially younger learners, cannot really afford to lose 6 months of learning process. That's not going to fly. So there are two types of providers, and we see really that there are great differences in terms of what these providers need to do and what are they asked to do. So what are the key takeaways that you can really think of no matter what type of provider you represent? And that's the final part of the presentation, the message that I would like to convey. So the first one is really that the immediate future is still uncertain. We might have a lockdown. In some cases, there is already lockdown. We don't know how long this lockdown will last. We don't know what's the effect on business continuity. And in cases higher education, a lot of providers also don't know what will be the long-term impact on their financial situation. So prepare contingencies. That's my first message. Really, it's very paramount for every educational stakeholder to prepare for contingencies and not to just have one plan based on the current situation, because this current situation can develop very quickly and you need to be prepared. So that's the first one. The second one is communication, communication, communication. You really need to make sure that every key stakeholder is on board with what your messaging is and what your plan is. And that goes not only for learners and the stakeholders that are paying the bills, so either government or students, but also parents. Parents are very much overlooked stakeholder group, but they are very important, especially in primary and partially in secondary education, because parents are those who will be in case of lockdown in daily contact with learners and hopefully also teachers as well. And they really need to be fully on board with your message and your planning. So engage with parents as well as educators and learners, obviously. And the third message that I would like to convey is the importance of engaging with wider ecosystem. And by wider ecosystem, I mean, of course, the financing authorities, government, but also EdTech. Because let's face it, there is a lot of very good solutions to help you with to overcome the current crisis, be it in the collaborative space, be it in learning management systems. A lot of those solutions are partially free or free. A lot of those are obviously paid for. But you need to be prepared to engage with this ecosystem. Don't be shy and reach out to the providers of these new solutions. Reach out to them, ask about the options that they can offer, and engage with wider ecosystem to make sure that your suite of solutions really fits your need, and that you will be able to fit the need of your educators, learners, as well as parents. So that's I think is the key messages that you need to be aware when trying to steer your educational institutions through these very muddy and dangerous waters that 2020 has brought. But let's hope that you will succeed, and thank you for your attention.